All right, let's dive into Cartagena, Colombia today. We've got articles and websites galore ready to be explored. Picture this: colorful colonial streets, those amazing Caribbean beaches. It's all waiting for us.
Cartagena is more than just beaches. It's where history meets the modern world, really.
Hmm.
We're talking a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the old walled city, right alongside a bustling modern skyline.
So it's not just a pretty picture, there's a story waiting to be uncovered.
Exactly. And that's what we'll do. Peel back the layers and find out what makes Cartagena tick.
Perfect. So let's begin with the walled city. What really stood out to you in the sources?
Well, the clock tower, the Torre del Reloj, that's a must-see. But think about this. It was more than just a grand entrance. It marked the line between freedom and captivity for those who built it, the enslaved people. Imagine carrying that history as you walk through those arches.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. It definitely adds a whole new level of meaning to simply taking a photo there.
Right. And speaking of layers, getting lost in the cobbled streets was something our sources really emphasized, not just for the cafes and shops, but to actually soak in the stories within the walls.
Some articles even suggested ditching the map entirely, just wandering until you stumble upon something incredible. What do you think about that approach?
There's definitely a magic to unexpected discoveries. But for those who like a little more context, I did notice a few mentions of free walking tours. They're led by locals, giving you that insider perspective, the stories behind the buildings that you wouldn't find in any guidebook.
And maybe a tip on the best place to grab an arepa. Speaking of which, those palenqueras, the women selling fruit in those vibrant dresses, they're descendants of escaped slaves. That adds another layer to the whole experience, doesn't it?
It's a direct connection to the past. When we talk about the past, the Castillo de San Felipe de Barajas has to be mentioned. This massive Spanish fortress overlooking the city, it's more than just the views. It represents military engineering at its finest. One source talked about how the tunnels were designed to amplify sounds, allowing them to hear enemy movements from miles away.
A fortress that listens. That's incredible. And then right nearby, you have the Palace of the Inquisition. Beautiful architecture from the photos, but with a very dark history.
It really makes you think, how can one place hold beauty and darkness like that? How do you think Cartagena has reconciled with this darker side of its past?
It's a tough question. It must be an ongoing process, this balancing act of honoring the past while celebrating the present.
Definitely. And speaking of celebrating, let's talk about island escapes. Our sources were really enthusiastic about Tirabamba Island, a quick and affordable boat ride away. The journey itself sounds amazing, watching the city skyline fade as you head towards those turquoise waters.
Like stepping into a travel brochure. But one source did mention the potential for tourist traps, especially with all-inclusive packages. How can you avoid those?
It's all about research, finding reputable tour operators.
Mm.
Or, for the adventurous types, going independent. It may take a bit more planning, but the reward is that authentic experience, not some generic tourist trap.
Finding that balance between spontaneity and being informed. Important stuff. And speaking of being informed, those Rosario Islands. Some sources mentioned incredible snorkeling world class in the Rosario and San Bernardino Corals National Park. What makes this park so special?
Well, it boasts some of the most diverse coral reefs in the Caribbean. And it's not just about the beauty. They're essential for the entire ecosystem. Protection for the coastlines, a habitat for all those marine species, even help with regulating the climate.
It sounds like a whole underwater world waiting to be discovered, not just a pretty place to snorkel.
Exactly. Now, back on the mainland, how would you experience Cartagena like a local? What caught your eye in the sources?
Okay, the Chiva bus for sure. That colorful party bus cruising through the city with music blasting. Seems like a fun way to see the sights and maybe let loose a little.
A unique way to experience that city energy, that's for sure. And speaking of energy, we can't forget about Cartagena's legendary salsa scene. There are even salsa bar hopping tours where you can pick up a few moves and experience the nightlife like a local.
We've got history, beaches, nightlife, and of course the food.
Absolutely. The street food here is out of this world. Arepas, empanadas, patacones, and one source specifically mentioned Plaza San Diego for the absolute best arepas in town. A vendor there, apparently, has been perfecting his recipe for over 50 years. People literally line up down the block to try them.
Talk about dedication. And what about drinks? Any local specialties we should look out for?
One source raised about this coconut lemonade. Freshly squeezed coconut water with lime juice and sugar. Simple, but incredibly refreshing. And for the more adventurous, there's the rifajo, a mix of beer and Colombian soda. Surprisingly good, apparently.
Okay, adding those to the list. Now, before we get too carried away with the food and drinks, what about the cultural scene? Cartagena is known for more than just parties and beaches, right?
Absolutely. This is a city that thrives on creativity. The Hay Festival, for example, an internationally recognized literary event, attracted some of the biggest names in literature. Imagine being surrounded by authors, poets, thinkers from around the world, sharing their stories in this vibrant setting.
A book lover's paradise. And then there's the International Film Festival, drawing in filmmakers and film enthusiasts alike.
A celebration of storytelling in every form. And speaking of stories, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's house right in the Old City, a must-visit for any literature fan. It's a private residence now, but just picturing him walking those streets, weaving his magical realism, it's incredible.
Amazing how a place can influence an artist's work. Cartagena, with its rich history and vibrant culture, seems like the perfect muse. But for those of us still in the dreaming and planning stages, what are some practical things we need to know?
First things first, the best time to visit for drier weather is from the end of November to the end of April. Getting around is pretty easy, taxis being the most common. Just make sure you agree on a price before you hop in. Avoid any surprises.
Good tip. And what about accommodations? Is it all luxury resorts, or are there options for every budget?
Cartagena caters to all types of travelers, really. You'll find everything from budget-friendly hostels to those luxurious boutique hotels, each offering a unique experience. One source even suggested the Getsemani neighborhood, known for its vibrant street art and those trendy boutique hotels.
So there's a place to stay for every style and budget.
Exactly. Now, one thing that stood out in the sources was the emphasis on the markets. They're more than just places to shop. They're living, breathing representations of the city's soul. You'll find everything imaginable: fresh produce, spices, handcrafted souvenirs, traditional clothing.
The colors and smells must be amazing.
Oh, absolutely. And don't forget, haggling is part of the culture. So brush up on those bargaining skills, be prepared for some lively back and forth. It's all part of the fun.
This is fantastic. We've covered so much: the history of the walled city, the allure of those island escapes.
We've only just scratched the surface. But the important thing is that you, our listener, now have a taste of what makes Cartagena so special. This city where history and modernity intertwine, where vibrant culture meets breathtaking natural beauty. What aspect of Cartagena speaks to you the most so far? Hold on to that curiosity because our deep dive continues. Back to Cartagena we go. Strolled the streets, dipped our toes in the Caribbean, maybe even tried a salsa step or two.
It's been quite a journey. And that Plaza San Diego arepa with that 50-year-old recipe is still on my mind. Just thinking about it makes me hungry.
Legendary arepas for sure. You know, one source mentioned something interesting about another Cartagena specialty, patacones. Those fried plantains, apparently they've perfected the art here. Double fried, infused with garlic. Can you imagine the smell?
Mouth-watering. It's amazing how food can transport you, isn't it? It's like a window into a culture's soul.
I like that. A window into the soul. And some sources talked about these street food tours.
Yeah.
Wandering through the markets, trying all those exotic flavors, and hearing the stories behind the dishes.
That sounds incredible. Those immersive experiences are the best. But let's switch gears a bit, something a little more somber. We talked about the Palace of the Inquisition earlier, and it really stayed with me. Underneath all the beauty and charm, there's this history of pain and oppression.
It's true. We can't ignore that history. One source mentioned the House of Dungeons in the palace. People accused of heresy, imprisoned there. They even have torture tools on display. A chilling reminder of the brutality.
It's hard to reconcile those images with the vibrant city we're exploring now. It makes you think about learning from the past, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And maybe it highlights how travel can open our eyes. It's not just about escaping, but confronting those uncomfortable truths, expanding our understanding of the world.
I agree. Speaking of expanding our understanding, our sources mention some lesser-known spots, places that offer a glimpse into different sides of Cartagena's culture.
One that caught my attention was La Boquilla, a fishing village just outside the city. It sounds like a world away from the tourist crowds. You can actually join fishing tours with local fishermen, learn their techniques, maybe even catch your dinner.
That sounds like a real adventure. I love that, connecting with the local community like that. Speaking of authentic experiences, what about those coconut souvenirs? I remember reading about a workshop. You can learn to make them yourself.
Oh yeah, fun experience. And you get to support local artisans while taking home a unique souvenir. Win-win.
Absolutely. And for our literature fans, we can't forget Gabriel Garcia Marquez's house, right in the Old City.
A pilgrimage for literature lovers. even though it's a private residence now. Just standing there, picturing him, walking those streets, finding inspiration for his magical realism. It's something special.
The power of place, how it shapes an artist's vision. Cartagena seems like the perfect inspiration. Let's talk about logistics. We covered getting around the city, but what about getting to Cartagena itself?
Well, Rafael Núñez International Airport has direct flights from major cities all over the world. And if you're already in Colombia, domestic flights from Bogota and Medellin are actually very affordable.
What about those who prefer a more scenic route? A road trip, maybe?
Buses run from various cities, but be warned the journey can be long, especially from Bogota. Might be a good idea to break it up or choose a flight if you're short on time.
Good advice. I have to ask about something that really stood out in the sources. Those sunsets.
Ah, yes. Cartagena sunsets are legendary. One source recommended Café del Mar. It's a bar right on the city walls. Imagine that, sipping a cocktail as the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky with those fiery colors.
Magical. But for those who prefer something a bit quieter, you can always stroll along the city walls or find a peaceful spot on one of the beaches.
Exactly. It's about what resonates with you. That's what's great about Cartagena. Something for everyone. Adventure, relaxation, cultural immersion, a bit of everything. You're bound to find it here.
You've convinced me. Before we wrap up this part, I want to throw out a little challenge to our listeners.
I'm always up for a challenge. What do you have in mind?
Well, we've talked history, culture, food, those incredible sunsets. What about a personal connection? What story would you tell if Cartagena were your muse?
That's a great question. Encourages our listeners to go beyond the facts and connect with Cartagena on a deeper level. Maybe it's walking those cobblestone streets, tasting those amazing flavors, or dancing the night away to salsa rhythms.
Or maybe something completely different. The point is to let Cartagena spark your imagination, see where it takes you.
Exactly. Travel is more than just ticking off destinations. It's about the stories we create along the way. Who knows, maybe someday we'll have the pleasure of hearing your Cartagena story right here on our deep dive.
That would be amazing. For now, let's keep exploring this city. What else have our sources uncovered?
Welcome back to our Cartagena adventure. We've gone deep into its history, tasted its incredible flavors, and even imagined ourselves dancing under the Caribbean stars.
But there's always more to discover, right?
Of course. And, these sources really highlighted how Cartagena rewards those curious travelers, those who go beyond the usual tourist spots.
Oh, I love that. What hidden gems did we unearth?
Well, the Basurto market really stood out. It's not your typical polished market, a little chaotic, maybe a bit gritty, but a truly authentic experience.
One source even described it as sensory overload. Fresh produce, street food, even live turtles.
It's not for everyone, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But if you want to see the real Cartagena, the heart of the city, Basurto is a must-visit.
Okay, maybe not for the faint of heart, but definitely an adventure. Let's shift gears a bit. Talk about something, well, beautiful. What about the architecture? Those colonial buildings are fascinating.
Oh, Cartagena is an architectural wonderland. The Cathedral of St. Catherine of Alexandria really stood out in the sources. That iconic yellow tower and terracotta dome, it's practically a symbol of the city.
I can picture it now, those vibrant colors against the blue sky. And I remember reading about another church, the Convent and Church of San Pedro Claver.
Ah, yes. Fascinating history there. Named after a Spanish monk, dedicated his life to defending the enslaved people brought to Cartagena. He's actually considered a saint now.
It's amazing how these buildings hold so much history, so many stories. It makes you want to travel back in time. Imagine what life was like back then.
Speaking of stepping back in time, one source mentioned a really interesting tradition. A Botero sculpture in Plaza Santo Domingo, La Gorda Gertrudis. People rub certain parts of her for good luck.
Wait, seriously, which parts?
Let's just say it involves her more prominent features. Breasts, bum, for luck and love, apparently.
Okay, that's going on my list. It's those little quirks that make a place memorable.
For sure. Speaking of memorable, I found a fascinating detail. Matute Brook, near the town of Turbico, fed by these crystal-clear underground streams. Lush vegetation. Sounds like a perfect escape for nature lovers.
So even in a bustling city like Cartagena, you can find those little slices of paradise.
Exactly. Always something new waiting to be discovered, just off the beaten path.
Well, as much as I hate to say it, it seems our Cartagena deep dive is coming to an end.
It's flown by. But I think we did a good job uncovering the magic of this city.
Absolutely. We explored the history, tasted the flavors, even found some hidden gems.
And hopefully inspired our listeners to create their own Cartagenan story.
Exactly. Whether it's planning that future trip or letting their imagination run wild, Cartagena has a way of capturing your heart. It sparks that sense of adventure.
So, to our listeners, keep exploring, keep discovering, keep diving deep. You never know what treasures you'll find.